of the Australian Trucking Association. For years, the ATA and PACCAR and its dealer network have collaborated to present the Technology and Maintenance Conference. Last year, in response to the COVID-19 restrictions, the ATA and PACCAR came together to deliver the first ever TMC online event. This was a huge learning curve as we worked to ensure that we could provide the peer-to-peer learning opportunities that you, at TMC delegates, know and love. Despite current restrictions and recent lockdowns, we are excited to once again be able to deliver valuable educational content to you, no matter where you are located around the country. Developed with input from the ATA's Industry Technical Council and the wider trucking industry, there is no other event that delivers high quality, first-hand knowledge like this. I'd like now to pass to Managing Director of PACCAR Australia, Andrew Hajikaku, before we kick off with our first live session. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Hello, I'm Andrew Hajikaku, Managing Director of PACCAR Australia. Welcome to the PACCAR and Dealer Technology and Maintenance Conference for 2021. This year has presented many challenges for us and has helped all Australians appreciate just how much the road freight transport industry does for our country. So while it would have been great to see you all in person again, the ATA continues to use technology to help us stay connected and deliver the learning and the experience you come to expect and value from TMC. On behalf of PACCAR and our wonderful dealers, welcome, and we hope you enjoy TMC Online. To get things underway now, I'd like to welcome Ross Longmire, Romesh Rodrigo, and Gail Broadbent, who in our first live session will explore the future of urban freight, how electric trucks could fit in, and how that may shape the future of light vehicles in urban distribution.
Thank you, David and Andrew, for the welcome to TMC Online. It's now time for our first live and interactive session on electric trucks. Are they the future of urban freight? My name is Sam Marks. I'm the Transport and Infrastructure Advisor at the Australian Trucking Association. The ATA and our members have been working to ensure that there is a focus on the future of the industry, having an environmentally sustainable industry through technology and innovation, and to focus on ensuring that future remains cost competitive for trucking businesses. Today, we're fortunate to have a keynote presentation from Romesh Rodrigo. Romesh is a senior manager with Daimler Truck and Bus Australia Pacific. He has an engineering degree and has worked in various technical and management roles for a number of manufacturers. His most recent role encompasses all three Daimler brands, and it involves the future vehicle strategy for Daimler Truck and Bus. Future perspective is a key focus for Romesh, including efficiency, advanced technologies, and its role in supporting Australia's future freight task. Romesh today, after his presentation, will be joined by Ross Longmire and Gail Broadbent on an expert panel where you can ask your questions. Gail is a leading researcher on the transition to electric vehicles, currently at the University of New South Wales. And Ross has more than 20 years experience at Toll Group and has responsibility for all new and current fleet management and maintenance. On the comment box on your screen, you can type your questions as they come to you. We will come to those questions in the Q&A at the end, but feel free to write those questions as they come to you. But now we will go to Romesh and his presentation on electric trucks. Thanks, Romesh.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you to the ATA for having me to Seems that we might be having some technical issues here. I'm not seeing anything change, unfortunately.
Romesh, we just couldn't hear your start, so we might go to your introduction again. You were just
Sure.
couldn't hear you there. Thank you.
Okay, are we okay to go again?
Yep, all good. Sorry, Romesh, can't hear you.
Hello?
All good. Yep.
Okay. Right, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, thank you. I can see that. I'm hoping that you can all hear me, so I will keep talking until I get told that you didn't hear me. So we This is going to be based out of both hydrogen vehicles as well as battery-powered vehicles. But the most important thing to recognize here is that all of these vehicles are electric powertrain vehicles. Could I have the next slide, please? So, Australia's freight task. What is exceedingly important for us is that we recognise, and I'm sure some of the other speakers will talk about this, in particular Gail and Ross, will talk about the fact that transportation is the indispensable backbone of our society. Our growing urbanisation is really demanding more efficient transport solutions from operators and also the industry. What we really need to recognise is that trucks are tools of trade. Our customers buy these vehicles. Emily, I assume the audio's gone down. Thank you. All right. So, as I've touched on before, and as the theme of the presentation, the future for us is electric powertrain. And I think next slide, please. So what do we know? Change is definitely upon us here, and we can see this by the myriad of articles that you can see on this slide picture to the right. And as I've talked about before, it will be battery and hydrogen combinations to meet our freight task. All we really need.
Okay, apologies everyone. And Romesh, we keep on having the audio drop out, unfortunately. What we might do whilst we explore the audio issues is maybe we're thinking we'll jump to some questions to start with. So, Gail and Ross, if I can bring you back online as well, that would be great. And what we might do to get us to kick off here is, Ross, with your experience at Toll Group, I'm wondering if you can talk to us from an operator perspective about, what the experience has been for Toll Group and the processes that you've looked at of looking to add electric trucks to your fleets. What have you done and sort of how have you done it?
All right, fantastic. Thanks, Sam. Can you hear me clearly? Wonderful.
All good, Ross.
Firstly, thanks very much to the today and PACCAR for their support and the opportunity to share our journey so far with electric vehicles. So our initial, and look, we're very much in the trial stages still with electric vehicles. We started 2018 with a trial in Japan. It was a single vehicle trial initially. And we did that off the back of having OEM support available at the time. So we ran that for a short period in Japan. Obviously got our initial learnings, which I'll touch a little bit more on. We then trialled a small rigid in Australia in around 2019. We were then able to package as part of a large purchase of vehicles in Japan for the toll business up there. We were able to add 2 electric vehicles into that fleet as well. So in addition to that, we have purchased some electric vans in Singapore and run tolls there as well. And we're currently in the process of implementing a trial again in New Zealand with electric trucks looking to deliver through the Auckland metropolitan region. Initially, a lot of our focus has been overseas, and where we're looking to scale things, there's a lot more clarity with government subsidies and incentives for what we're looking at trialling overseas. So currently in Australia, what we're working on at the moment, and with PACCAR and also some of our customers, we're looking at what we can do from a next step perspective to bring additional electric units into Australia and sort of extend our trial in the Australian market. It's been a bit of a stop-start process at times, and that comes as we start to learn more about what the challenges are, not just for us but also for our customer base as well. And it's we're very much an early adopter. Or we're in the early adopter stage, I think, at the moment, and there's a lot of work to be done to actually work out how we can go to scale in Australia. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Ross. Now we'll go to Gail, but before I do that, you may have noticed in the comment box, everyone, that Emily has said that a copy of Romesh's presentation will be made available. But as if you have questions on electric trucks, on so Ross and Gail are talking about, do add them to the comments box as we go. And to apologise again for the technical issues. It is 2021, unfortunately, with lockdown in various states and varying qualities of internet connection, and such is the world we live in. Gail, we'll go to you next. Your sort of extensive research background in the electric vehicle space, and understands a lot of that research has been on sort of behavioural issues, and wondering if you can talk to us about the behavioural aspects around things like fear of change, different types of consumers, and what sort of from your research you think could be relevant in terms of if we then start thinking about the trajectory for electric trucks.
Sure. Thanks, Sam. Yes, I've done quite a bit of research on human behaviour and human attitudes to electric vehicles. I've done a study here in Australia and a big study in New Zealand. And pretty much you find the same thing. I mean, New Zealand's much further ahead than us, so their experiences are quite relevant, and particularly with the findings that I had. So as you can imagine, people are different. You have the enthusiasts all the way through to the laggards who, I'm never going to buy one of those. So, there's quite a range of people. But it's understanding what their concerns are, how you prepare the market for change. The things that I found that people are most concerned about with cars is the price of the vehicle, and I think that would be no surprise. That would be one of the most important. But more surprisingly, it was the ability to recharge. That's more concerning, because even if you make the decision, I want to buy an electric vehicle and I'm going to be able to recharge it at home. Now, if you're a truck, you'd be recharging back at base. But it's being able to do the long trips. That's the issue, is being able to do long trips, and also where you're going to recharge and how long you're going to wait. So I know with the trucking industry, drivers have to have their breaks at certain times. So naturally you'll want recharges to coincide with where they're going to take their breaks. So if you're thinking about it from an industry point of view, is locating the recharges, but they need to be fast enough to get the recharge for the kind of vehicles. So it's all going to come down to the size of the vehicles and the distance they want to get in the 2 hours or whatever it is before they have to have their next break. That's going to determine what size recharger you have, because in effect, the download speed of the electricity coming into the vehicle is going to determine how fast that recharge is. So that's probably the most critical aspect for cars, and I imagine that for trucks it's going to be the most critical thing, because the price of the vehicle, as time goes on, that's going to change, because the most important factor that contributes to the additional cost of an electric vehicle is the battery. But as time has gone on, the price of the battery is coming down, and within a few years we're going to reach price parity with ICE vehicles. Within Bloomberg New Energy Finance are predicting that will come around about 2026, 2027 for cars. And so once that happens, it's really going to come down to, do people feel confident that they can recharge? Now, from a personal point of view, if you can park your car off street, you're going to be able to recharge your car at night at home, and that's fine. But if you live in a place with no recharging capability at home, you're going to rely on public provision of that. And I think if you think about it in terms of trucks, the same questions are going to occur to you. Where does the truck go at night? How long is its time during the day? And I think the other thing that I found most surprising in New Zealand, given that they've had policies since 2016 to encourage people to buy electric cars, was the lack of knowledge. I was really taken aback by that, because I thought, it's been in the country now for 5 years and they're much more common on the streets than you would see here. But still people had a very limited knowledge about electric cars. So I think an information ability to get information, and I think this is where the Trucking Association might be very helpful for its members, is providing that information. Because questions about, one of the big questions people had was about battery longevity, how long before they would have to replace the battery in their car. Now, as it turns out, as the technology improves, that's getting better all the time. And now it is thought that electric vehicles, the battery will last as long as the car, and that you probably won't need to replace it. So it's those kinds of questions that the Trucking Association are going to really be able to help their members with, is giving them the information about the changes that are coming and about the updated technology. As the technology improves and the ability to recharge improves, and where are those recharges? That's the sort of information that people are going to need and want, and that will be a great thing the Trucking Association can do for their members, is to provide that information. So I think the lessons that we get from electric vehicle cars is going to apply to the trucking industry. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Gail. I'll make a sort of shameless plug here too, building on that answer. That is part of what we're doing here today in terms of looking at the information and providing that to industry. So, when you finish with this session, everyone, there are also a bunch of pre-recorded on-demand sessions, and there's one, for example, on the cost competitiveness of hydrogen, for example, from the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. And we will also make Romesh's presentation available. I will now turn to questions from the floor, our virtual floor, from Brad. I'm thinking, Ross, this may be one I might invite you to comment on. But Brad asks, how far away is electric or H2 fuel cell vehicles for long-haul road transport activities? And what do we see as being the top 3 prohibitors? And how do we solve for those? Not sure if you have any views on those, Ross.
Yeah, thanks, Sam, and thanks, Brad, for the question. I think, and look, this is, I suppose, a little bit of knowledge that I gain in dealing with the OEMs and working through what the opportunities are. I think we're more likely to see, and I think Gail touched on the timeframes as well, being sort of late 2020s, but I think from 2025, 2026, we'll start to see some opportunity for the cost parity to be normalised a little bit. So I suppose that's point one of what are the prohibitors. I don't think it's something that we're going to see tomorrow, apart from obviously trials, and there's going to need to be industry movement as well. It can't just be a single carrier that is going to be able to operate with electric or hydrogen vehicles to really push the change from internal combustion to electric or hydrogen. So there's a lot of work, I think, still to do with the OEMs. I know that we've got trials such as PACCAR's Port of Los Angeles trial and things like that are underway at the moment for hydrogen, but that's sort of very early stages as well. So we're aiming towards the second half of the 2020s, so 2025 plus. But there will need to be significant work for trials on the way through. So just to touch on the prohibitors, the 3 for me, and keep in mind I sit in the fleet management area, so I'm consistently judged on cost. That's obviously going to be the first one, is how do you stay competitive when you're looking at vehicles that are costing sort of 3.5 to 5 times the price of an internal combustion engine. From the second area there as well is in regards to maintenance staff. We've got around 300 maintenance staff at the moment that are on the tools and dedicated to keeping ICE vehicles on the road. We need to be looking at what we can do from a training perspective to get people across how they can service or how they can maintain electric vehicles as well. And then the third thing is, what do we do in the event of either a breakdown, accident? How do we actually upskill our staff to know what to do in those instances, as well as the emergency service providers and things like that as well. So, they're probably the 3 big ones that I see at the moment as prohibitors. How do we solve them? I think it's going to have to be industry-wide. It can't just be a single company or a couple of the larger companies. We've got to work together with our customers. We've got to work together with our employees, drivers, and then obviously the transport companies, government bodies, and the ATA as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. Just to draw everyone's attention to Bill McKinley's comment, if you haven't seen it, sort of building from Gail's previous comment, so Bill sort of put to the audience, what information would you like? What information do you need? And how can we best get that information to you? Feel free to comment directly under Bill's comment if you have responses to that. Otherwise, we are now going to turn back to Romesh and give this another go. I'll invite the rest of our panel to turn off cameras and microphones, and we will give this another go. Thank you, Romesh.
Okay, are we working this time? Have we got audio? Have we got audio?
Yes, we're all good, Romesh.
Okay, thank you, everybody. It's very hard doing these virtual sessions, and I echo David and Andrew's comment before. I would have much rather been there in front of me than you have no choice to relegate me to radio.
Have lost you again, Romesh, unfortunately.
Okay, what about now, Sam? Are we okay?
Yep. Nope, now's good.
Okay, seems to be a little bit which way the wind's blowing. So, echoing a lot of the comments that came up during the discussion.
Sorry, everyone. Unfortunately, we have lost Romesh again. Okay, well, apologies, everyone. This is unfortunately the world we live in, with lockdowns and varying internet connection issues, which I'm sure we're all quite familiar with. Let's bring back Gail and Ross and go back to some of our questions. So let's have a look here. So Ian Thompson has a question about, are there any specific freight tasks that have been identified as most suitable for electric? Would either of you, maybe Ross, might have views on that, potentially?
Yeah, thanks, Ian, for the question. Thanks, Sam. The area that we've seen at the moment is certainly in the smaller vehicle market for electric, where the units are returning back to base and generally parked up overnight to allow charging. So if you look in the parcel, home delivery, small grocery, and some of the beverage areas, they're sort of the key areas at the moment that we're focusing on. But I think over time, as we start to see improvement in battery life, we'll start to see that in the sort of mid-range section as well, into the heavier beverage market, where vehicles tend to be operational. And generally stop-start market as well. So I think they're sort of the key areas that we're focusing on at the moment and where we see the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. Gail, we might sort of go back to you and sort of some of the research that you've done. And I mean, from a public policy point of view, when we're looking at big changes like this, there's issues in changing, the cost of changing, but there's also costs, I guess, to staying the same. So, do you have any comments on the health and other costs, I guess, in continuing to use internal combustion engine trucks, and if there are specifics from that for the driver, for example, as well?
Yeah, I think people don't actually appreciate the impact of the negative side of the current system of ICE vehicles, whether it's cars or trucks, because those things are so hidden, because they've been around for our whole lives that we don't actually see what it's like without them. And I think the health costs are quite shocking. $2.7 billion a year goes on the health outcomes that come from driving ICE vehicles. So things like, now individual truck drivers probably can relate to this, the vibration of a truck causes back pain. I'm sure a lot of truck drivers would recognise that one. But it's also just the noise of trucks. If you're inside the cab, it's quite a noisy thing. And I actually have bought an electric vehicle since I've started doing the research. And every time somebody else is in the car, the first thing they say to me is, I can't get over how quiet this is inside the car. So it's a lot quieter. There's a lot less vibration. Sure, there's the tyre noise, but that's all you get. You don't get motor noise. So that's a really big impact. And it actually is one of the drivers for Europe to change over to electrification, because in Europe, noise has been quantified. They can quantify how much health problems come out of it. So there's excess noise raises your blood pressure. So that's one thing. And then there's a whole lot of diseases that come out of raised blood pressure. I mean, I'm sure you can all relate to the concept of cardiac disease. So cardiac disease is one of them. There are developmental diseases for children out of noise. Children who live on busy roads experience developmental problems, but just the particulates is the other one that causes a lot of health problems. So I think we'd appreciate that lung cancer from diesel is a known factor now. So that is a definite cause of cancer, but it also is thought to cause bladder cancer, surprisingly. There are asthma. I think you could all appreciate asthma is definitely associated with the particulates that come out of burning diesel. There's also unborn children are affected by particulates. They actually have, when they're born, they actually have smaller lungs than babies that are born away from major roads. The other thing that you can have is skin problems. So skin cancers, dermatitis, eczema, inflammatory problems with your skin, men's baldness. So there's another one that's impacted by particulates in the atmosphere. So there's a lot of health issues that come around. So I think if we can electrify the fleet, and one thing you do have to remember about electrifying the fleet, people say, oh, but they use coal-fired power stations to produce the electricity. But as I'm sure you'd all appreciate, the amount of coal-fired power station generated electricity is declining. The amount of renewable energy is increasing. So over time, you buy your electric truck or your electric car, and over time, the emissions and the particulates that come out of the generation of electricity decline, whereas you buy an ICE vehicle, from the day you buy it to the day that that vehicle is recycled or crushed, it is emitting the same amount of particulates, the same amount of emissions. So the problems that come from electric vehicles to do with the electricity supply improves over time, whereas it never can if you're using fuel. So I think that's a really important factor that people don't recognise, how important the health impacts are on not only the individual drivers, but on the community as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Gail. I think, it's worth sort of, I guess, building on your comments there as well, and just, bringing it back to, I guess, the urban freight task. We're talking about sort of noise and air quality and those sorts of things. That it's certainly related to, the urban freight task. Perhaps there's a future where that also impacts the restrictions or less restrictions on truck movements. It's worth keeping that part of the conversation. Just an update, everyone, on Romesh. We are going to record Romesh's presentation separately. It will be available as an on-demand video later during the event as part of our library of on-demand videos. So it will be there, it will be available, and you'll be able to watch it at your convenience once it is online. Romesh is still around as well, so if you have specific questions for Romesh, feel free to put them in the chat box on your screen. You can see he's already left a comment there about being a staged approach to implementation. So if you have questions for Romesh, ask a chat question and he will respond to. Now we will go to some of the questions that are still there. I think, Ross, there's a question from Andrew and Damien that are essentially related, which is about, I guess, customers. So Andrew asks, do you think that when electric hydrogen becomes viable, some customers will actively seek transporters offering this? And Damien asks, are there any freight customers looking to require a decarbonised supply chain? So I guess, do you have thoughts, to the extent that you can say them, about, I guess, the sort of customer demand for this sort of transport?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for the questions. We certainly, we haven't, or to my knowledge, I haven't had a customer approach us about a fully decarbonised supply chain. I think, a large portion of our customers understand the current predicaments around cost availability and the challenges that we face as an industry in converting straight from ICE across to electric and hydrogen. There is significant interest in what we're actually doing as an organisation to continue to drive down our carbon emissions, and we consistently work and measure and drive to lower our targets. We're currently working through a new plan and strategy at the moment in what we're doing in that space. With the trials that we've done, and it doesn't matter where we've actually done that, whether it's New Zealand, Australia, or Japan and Singapore, we get significant amount of interest from our customers in what we're actually doing in that space and how they can be involved or support trials. And there's significant, I suppose, kudos for us internally from our employees that we're looking to do something different and looking to make a difference from an emission standpoint. So I think the average age of a vehicle in Australia at the moment is something like 14 years, or prime mover in Australia is something like 14 years. So I think there's a long way to go for us as an industry to really look to make that change, but there will be customers that are actively looking and pursuing ways to increase their carbon footprint in conjunction with their transport suppliers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. Sorry, just going through the questions. Andy Dival has a question about width, essentially, saying that Tesla have a heavy-duty truck, but it's not compliant to our existing Australian ADR rules due to width. Can we push governments to allow? Don't know if either Gail or Ross have views on that. I will do a shameless plug for a session tomorrow on TMC Online. There is a session on wider trucks with representatives from the government, as well as Bob, our chief engineer, and an operator as well. So if you're interested, Andy and others, in the width question, that is definitely a valid issue, and there will be a session tomorrow on it. Ross, I'm not sure. Do you have anything further on that? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I would fully support us to have a look at our vehicle widths in Australia. My understanding is we're around 2% of the global truck market. So with a lot of overseas vehicles being built wider than what there is in Australia, I'd be actively pushing and seeking support to go to at least 2.55 metres in width, and also look at what can happen from a axle weight perspective as well to allow us to take up this technology earlier. I understand there's opportunities for permits and things like that to get vehicles into trial, but I can't imagine the likes of Tesla are going to modify how they build their vehicles to suit Australian conditions. So I think it's a real opportunity for the ATA and all of us as an industry to continue to push for additional widths, lengths and weights inside vehicle specs.
Yes, certainly. Thanks, Ross. The ATA did, in our recent, policy work on this subject, look at the availability of zero-emission, both electric and hydrogen models in Australia. Have a look at what's available or expected to be available in both the European and US markets as well. There's a significant increase versus Australia and Europe, and even more again in North America. So moving to 2.55 or ideally a 2.6 metre width would open us up to a greater range of vehicles. But if you want to hear more about wider trucks and ask your questions on that subject, we will, there is a session on this tomorrow, so save your questions for that, because that will be a very interesting discussion. I want to move to, questions around what governments can potentially do to help accelerate the transition, so to speak, and perhaps throw to Gail whether, in what you've looked at in terms of the light vehicle space, what are some of the things that governments can do that would help to help to accelerate the transition.
Thanks for that. And I think all these things that you're asking about cars definitely will apply the same to trucks. They're the same issues. I think the first thing is the government needs to set a target of what our pathway will be. So by certain dates, what's your percentage going to be? So I think that's really important. So setting targets and actually having a legislation timetable of what you need to do to get to that point. So without any proper targets, leaving it to the market is going to be a much slower process, and I'm not sure that we can afford in emission sense to do that. So setting targets is important. The main thing that they have done in Europe is to set fuel emission standards, because this actually puts the burden on the manufacturers of the vehicles, because what that does is that it says for every brand of vehicle that you have, the average emissions coming out of their sales, so let's say VW or Scania, whoever it is, they sell a certain number of vehicles every year and they actually record what the emissions are per kilometre for that vehicle. So then they average it out over the brand, and if it doesn't meet a particular standard, they are fined quite a lot of money for every gram over that limit. So the only way the manufacturers can meet that standard and not get the fines is by selling a lot more electric vehicles. And so it pushes them into either paying fines for not bothering or forcing them to sell more electric vehicles. So that's one thing that the government can do. Another thing that one of the questioners mentioned over on the panel over on the side there was about infrastructure. Well, it is key. So in Europe, they have set targets about how many recharges they need, and they don't dictate where they've got to go. And I'm sure the industry can work that out for themselves. But they say a certain number of recharges so that the public can get access to them. Because it is, I'm sure you'll all understand that anyone who's just driving in their local area is just going to recharge at home, so that doesn't affect them. It's when you want to go away further than the distance that the car or the truck can do from its battery capacity, that's when you have to have recharges. And until you've got a certain number of recharges, the industry won't get started. So that's where the government support has to be, because it is quite expensive putting recharges in. Hydrogen fueling stations cost about $2 million each, so that's going to have to be very carefully thought through about where they go. A truck recharger could cost $500,000 for the really fast speed ones. So, there's a lot of costs involved. Now, it doesn't cost anything like that for cars, because the amount of electricity going into a car battery just depends on, how much digging around they have to do, how far away the electricity supply is, and so on. So it does vary according to where they put them. And so locating them is a really important business about working out where they have to go, but it's having enough. That is the critical thing, and that's where the government really has to have a role. Government tax rules is the other thing that can help the industry, whether it's cars or trucks, it doesn't matter. The tax write-offs, being able to write them off, and having electric cars being able to be written off. Certain tax rules are written, particularly with commercial car fleets. So I'm sure all the truck businesses would also run cars as well. And they generally write it off in a tax sense by how many kilometres you go and how much petrol you're buying. Now, that's never going to apply to an electric car. So changing the regulations and changing the legislation is a really important factor. So having a leadership group that can get together with government agencies, businesses, industry, whatever, you have to actually set up a leadership group. Now, this was something New Zealand did, and it was a really important factor for having success in making the transition. So I think that is something I'd be looking for. If they don't already have a leadership group, I'd be asking for that. And when it comes to regulations, we talked about infrastructure, the numbers of the infrastructure, but the other really important thing is interoperability. And what that means is that particular truck manufacturers or car manufacturers can't have, like, with a mobile phone, every brand's got its own recharger. You can't have that. You have to have it that every brand of truck, every brand of car can use the same plug, because if they're not interoperable and then the billing function is enabled, then you aren't going to have a successful business, because all of it has to be able to, you have to be able to bill for the electricity that you're buying, and it has to be easy to do. But it also has to mean that every single brand of truck, all the truck ones are obviously going to be separate to the car ones because of the size of the recharger units is different. But all the truck ones have to be interoperable, and all the car ones have to be interoperable. Up until now, Tesla had run their own network of rechargers, and if you owned any other kind of electric car, you couldn't use a Tesla recharger. Now, Elon Musk has actually said by the end of the year they're going to start making it so that everybody can use a Tesla recharger. So having that ability for the plug size just to fit, it's like when you go overseas and you're going to Japan or you're going to India or wherever, they've all got different power points, and that's a real nuisance. So having the ability for all the charge points to be the same is a really important thing, and the legislation has to be there to force that. So that's why I say about industry will need to work with government to make sure that the correct legislation is put in place. Before I forget, sorry, one more thing. The government has a real role in reducing the cost of vehicles, and they can do that through taxation. So it can say, all right, no GST on the vehicles when they come in, no luxury car tax so many years until the transition starts taking place. So you have to reward people for doing the right thing, but you also need to penalise the manufacturers with the emissions standards. So there's two ways of doing that. Sorry, thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Gail. Just to add to that, and another sort of shameless plug for the ATA's own work, but one of the other ideas that we put on the table was just having a temporary purchase incentive to try and reduce the cost differential between an electric and non-electric truck in the short term. To accelerate, I guess, the take-up and accelerate the point where we then reach sort of cost competitiveness in a natural sense. Ross, I'm going to sort of come to you with the same sort of question around government policy and other things that would make it easier. And Romesh, if you're in the chat box, I would love to hear your thoughts on the same question as well. I just want to acknowledge that Romesh has been very active answering a number of questions down the chat box, so do keep those questions coming in, although we will be out of time shortly. But Ross, if you have comments around government policy or incentives or what they could do, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sam. I think one of the gaps that we have at the moment is the certainty in addition to all the great points that Gail's raised. There is a real uncertainty around costs, and I think it'd be great for the government, and it needs to be state and federal, to be working together, even if they're supplying directionally accurate costs on what it will mean for the industry going forward. I think there's a lot of uncertainty in cost of charging, where our charging points are going to be. Is it going to, are we going to have them in line with rest stops? What's happening from a power supply point of view? We've been limited in some locations with trials just due to current load on the existing power network and substations. So I think they're all key areas that we'd really like to see more government participation and work with the industry. We touched on it earlier again around weights, widths, lengths, all of those sorts of things. So it'll be good to get some coverage on that tomorrow, or understanding on that tomorrow. The next area is training of our staff. They are very different vehicles to drive, and to look at the control of power and use of power throughout the day, it varies greatly, similar to what an ICE engine does, but depending on who's driving, we see significant variances in range with the vehicles. So I think there's support in that training area as well. Support for training of maintenance staff would be another area to cover off. And then I think there needs to be areas for regional support. So we had the question earlier on from Brad around, running into regional areas or long distance, medium distance cartage. I would think that there's potentially areas inside Australia that we should look to say, well, this should be a trial area for electric vehicles where we can put, a range of vehicles in. We can look to utilise existing solar farms and those sorts of things to fully utilise the green energy and look to grow in that area as well. I mean, a lot of our vehicles have second lives in regional areas, so we'll use them heavily in metropolitan areas and move them to regional areas. I'm sure a lot of other transport companies work that way as well. If we knew that we could put some of these vehicles into a lower use second life in regional areas where the infrastructure is already set up, that would be a great addition for us to understand how long we can actually keep these vehicles for. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. That was quite interesting. We are just about out of time, everyone, but one of the advantages of our technical challenges is that we have had a longer Q&A than originally planned, so there are upsides to all of this. There is a question I did miss, which, Romesh, if you're on, it might be one for you potentially, from Ian Thompson about axle weight concessions. Whether we should be pushing for that to get better uptake, or Ross, I'm not sure if that's, or you sort of touched on that before, if you have any further comments on that, or...
Not really at this stage, Sam. Yeah. So
no, that's all good. Well, thank you everybody for attending today. So Romesh has answered a number of questions down this side. Apologies again for the COVID technological internet connection challenges that we had earlier, but Romesh's presentation will be available as an on-demand session later. Thank you to Gail and Ross for also joining us today. It's been, quite good to have that perspective from an operator and also from a research policy sort of point of view, and something I have appreciated. And thank you everyone for delegate-wise for logging on and attending today and asking your questions. Doesn't stop here though. There is a session later this morning on the HVNL type changes, on duty standards and inspections and what's next. That is at 12:30. And in the meantime, there is the on-demand section where there's already a bunch of content where you can view, at your leisure. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Romesh, and Gail and Ross. And we will see you at the next session. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.